you could make an argument that these keys did not belong to the Democrats to begin with. At least I can. He, on the other hand, would say, no, 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 these keys belong to the Democrats. Well, that's a problem, because if that's indeed the case, then your system's junk. It can't be both. Your system can't work and that these keys belong to the Democrats, and it also fails. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Mad Hatter Show, where we talk about anything and everything under the sun. We can talk about news, we can talk about weather, we can talk about politics, social issues, a ghost story or two. We may even talk about what I had for breakfast that day, if that is what I choose to talk about. Today, I want to talk about the Nostradamus of our day, Mr. Allan Lichtman.
Of elections. He's correctly predicted 9 of the last 10. That is, until the early hours of Wednesday morning, when CNN predicted Donald Trump would win the presidency. I'm talking about Lichtman. He says his 13 keys are how he makes his predictions for the White House. Here's the moment he realized his prediction was wrong.
I'm starting to get a little nervous.
Yeah.
She needs to make up 170,000 votes.
I don't see it. The big Democratic counties are mostly in.
No, well, yeah.
I just don't see it. Good thing I have nothing to do tomorrow.
Yeah, I took off work tomorrow.
And I'm not doing any interviews.
Good.
I'm done with that.
This is an individual who is supposed to be objective. This is what we're about to see here. This is what we're about to see. He's not going to blame his system. And you can tell a lot about about a person's character by how they handle a loss. It's easy to handle a win. It is easy whenever you did not lose and for you to be nice and cordial, but it is a lot more challenging when you lose to maintain that composure about yourself, that objectivity about yourself, and to not blame others.
Now, well, Professor Allan Lichtman is here with us tonight to tell us what he thinks went wrong. Professor, thank you for joining us tonight. I mean, we've talked many times. Were the keys wrong, or was your interpretation off this time?
I think the fundamental problem was the keys, not my interpretation. No one's convinced me that was wrong. I was very critical of the Democrats for openly and viciously trashing their sitting president right out in public. I have never seen that before, and I've studied politics since the founding, and we saw Biden's approval rating plummet as they were doing that. I think that extended beyond Biden to weaken any Democratic candidate, since they're discrediting their own administration. Secondly, it rendered problematic one of my keys, the contest key, since we couldn't have a primary, but the Democrats did unite around Harris, and I turned the key in their favor, but we had never seen anything like that before, and that was problematic. But more.
So from the very beginning, what he does, if you're not aware, he has 13 keys. I'll pull those up here in just a second, and we can go over those. He has these 13 keys, and what he does is he awards each of these keys to one side or the other, either the incumbency or if you will, the challenger, Democrat or Republican. And he has to make a determination, all right, based upon his opinion of where this key should apply. Should it go towards the Democrats or should it go towards the Republicans? More appropriately, does it go towards the incumbent party or does it go towards the challenging party? And this is exclusive to the White House. This doesn't apply to the Senate necessarily or the House of Representatives, although I'm sure there are some obvious spillover effects. So if he decides that this key goes towards one party or the other, it's his call. It is entirely his call. I don't like making a big deal out of supposed objective systems when it comes to their ability of predicting something, especially whenever your test your test data is relatively small. So in this case, he's only had really just 10 elections to be able to determine if his model works. And when a data scientist creates a machine learning model, they take all of your data and you will split it up into what's called training data. It's about 80 to 90% of your sample, and then about 10 to 20%, which will be your testing data. That's where you're actually going to see, does this work? Well, we really have only had just about 10 elections, real world elections, to see if his model truly performs the way that it should. But it's important to understand we're dealing with what's called binary classification. It's where you only have two possibilities. It's either heads or tails. You flip a coin 10 times, what's the probability of it landing on something other than heads or tails? Very, very low, right? So we're really only dealing with something that can be heads or tails. That's it. It can be one or the other. So it has to be one of these two. In this situation, we only have 10 flips. And he has his thumb on the scale with every single flip. That's important to keep in mind. So let's go on.
Are trends that are long-term and affect the long-term future of our democracy, and the keys, because the keys depend upon a rational, pragmatic electorate deciding based on.
I paused it right here for a moment. This is where he begins to start to shift the argument less so from the value of the keys and more towards the electorate. And there were a few key words: a rational electorate. That is to say, an electorate that makes sense by my estimation. So if the electorate is doing what I want them to do, then they are behaving rationally. If the electorate is not doing what I want them to do, they are behaving irrationally. This is, again, where he's got his thumb on the scale. The subjectivity elements cannot be overstated. They cannot be overstated for this individual.
Whether the incumbent party should get 4 more years. And we've seen the explosion of some trends that have existed before, but not to this extent. Disinformation. Elon Musk.
And this is where we begin to turn that argument more towards the people. So the problem was not his keys. The problem was not the fact that he has his thumb on the scale with every single one of these elections. The problem here in this case is that you, as the voting public, did not do what Allan Lichtman says you were supposed to do. And the reason you didn't do so, in his estimation, in his opinion, number one, disinformation. And now he's blaming Elon Musk for that disinformation. Now, it doesn't matter who he's blaming. The reality is that he's blaming somebody. He's got to have a scapegoat. The problem can't be in his model. This is a problem with science when you have become so attached to your results, to your system, to your model, to your process, that you cannot reasonably evaluate your model, its performance, and recognize, hey, maybe my model is the problem. He dismissed that from the very beginning. He even said the problem's not his keys, or it's with his keys, but it's not his keys. The problem is, in his estimation, again, number one, voting electorate, they behaved irrationally. Now he's going to break down why they behaved irrationally. Anytime that something happens to you, good or bad, especially bad, and you react to it in a negative way, you have got to figure out a reason why you behaved the way that you did. And these are called rationalizations. So Allan Lichtman is now going to rationalize why you did not do what he wanted you to do. All right. Number one, disinformation.
Musk is, I don't know how many hundreds of billions he has. He has been the director of misinformation. 2 billion views of his spreading of disinformation, not just about the economy, but about immigrants, about minorities. We've never seen disinformation.
X does not influence my perception of the economy. It does not influence me when it comes to voting. In fact, most people that I interact with in my personal social circle are not influenced by what's going on X. You probably are not very heavily influenced. You might be aware, you might share some things, there might be some things trending, might be some new information, whatever. Great, good stuff. I think it's a good platform. At least it has become a better platform now that they're not banning everybody. But that's a different story. For Lichtman, he would love to see conservative voices silenced. He would love to see conservatives silenced. He would love to see people who disagree with him silenced. He didn't have a problem with X whenever they were banning people like Donald Trump. He didn't have a problem whenever they were banning conservatives. He didn't have a problem when they were banning Republicans. He didn't have a problem with that. He has a problem, though, with Elon Musk, who, as far as we can tell, values freedom of speech and has created this atmosphere, this application now, not created but purchased this application anyways, X or Twitter previously, and is allowing anybody to get on there and share whatever pretty much that they want to, as long as they're not directly threatening somebody. So, number one, problem is you. Number two, the reason it's a problem is because of Elon Musk and X, even though, as I pointed out, the majority of the voting public is not active enough on X for it to make any real difference.
This scale. Next, we have never seen to this scale the agitation of three trends that have been very deeply embedded in American history: misogyny, racism, and xenophobia. The first.
His argument is not that his keys had gotten anything wrong. He doesn't really acknowledge that there was anything wrong with his process. He doesn't acknowledge that there's anything wrong with his system. It was you, as the voting public, did not do what he wanted you to do. So therefore, you behaved irrationally. Reason why? First and foremost, because of Elon Musk. All right? Second to that, beyond Elon Musk and what happened on Twitter and disinformation, was that people are misogynist, racist, and xenophobic. Again, not about blaming himself or his process, but instead it's about blaming you as the voter. Now, what are his keys? All right, so I brought these up from Wikipedia. It's probably the best way of actually showing these to you. The very first one here is party mandate. And he gives a description, or at least Wikipedia, gives a description on each of these. And that's after the midterm election, the incumbent party holds more seats than after the previous midterm elections. Party mandate, clearly not on the Democrat side. I would say this one should automatically go over towards the, in this case, not the incumbent, but the challenging party. So towards the Republicans in this case. No primary contest. There was no serious contest. He gave this over to the incumbent party. He gave this key over to the Democrats, basically. Why? And I pointed this out before in one of my earlier videos about why his keys would ultimately fail. But this is before the election. But I want to come back and make this video just to ultimately explain a little bit more in detail why I think his keys are completely bogus and junk. But there was no primary contest. He has to make this determination. He's got to decide who gets the key. And he gave it to the Democrats. Why? Why did he choose to give it to the Democrats? Number three, incumbent seeking re-election. Well, no, he's not. Joe Biden was not the candidate here. So we've got, at the very beginning here, we have three keys that really and truthfully do not belong to the Democrats. All right, that did not. Number four, no third party. Okay, well, there wasn't a direct third party, but remember, we have an election that is not based upon the popular vote. It's based upon what? The Electoral College. So this is a state-by-state issue. There are states in which the third party made an impact. All right? States like Wisconsin and Michigan, for example, to a lesser extent in Pennsylvania. If it had not been for third parties in both, in 2016 and this year, it could have gone a little bit different. That's a possibility. So again, how are you doing? How are you awarding this, and why are you awarding it that way? And at the very end of the day, it doesn't really actually matter. All right. Strong short-term economy, folks. Do you really believe that the economy is strong right now? This is again where we're dealing with that hybrid between an objective and a subjective measure. It does not matter if the economy itself is growing at 6%. If inflation is outstripping the economic growth, so if inflation is 8% and economic growth, even if it's at 6%, you're still going the hole. It's the reality. So, which of these do you measure, okay? And which matters the most? Do you give greater credit to the GDP, which most people really don't care about, or towards inflation, which has a huge impact on your perception of the economy? Strong long-term economy. Real per capita economic growth during the term equals or exceeds the growth during the previous two terms. In other words, is it growing faster now than it did before? All right, that's the key. Again, why are you weighting it this way? People don't make decisions like this. I'm sorry, they don't. Major policy change. The incumbent administration affects major changes in national policy. Again, I pointed this out before. You can make a case for this either way. You can say there were no major policy changes, or there were. I would call going against the previous administration, in this case the Trump administration, and removing the wait in Mexico policy that we had for people who were seeking asylum. Hey, you could seek asylum in the U.S., but you had to go to the border and stay there. You could not enter into the U.S. They had facilities on the southern border. There were places in Mexico that were designated. You could go there and wait. We're not taking you into our country. Not until your case is actually heard. Whenever Joe Biden came in, one of the very first things that he did was to rescind the wait in Mexico policy. What did this create? This created an environment where millions of people, 10 million folks, 10 million were allowed into the country unvetted, unchecked. Here's your court date. We'll see you in 6 years. I would call that a major policy change. Social unrest. Again, there are some places around the country right now that have got some pretty bad unrest over the fact that they went from a population of 2,000 or 3,000 to a population of 10 to 20. Sorry, some of these towns can't handle that. It's just a reality. Even major cities can't handle that. They're cracking under the weight of all this illegal, unchecked immigration. No scandal. Well, there were some scandals. No foreign or military failure. Well, yes, we had one. We pulled out of Afghanistan and left billions of dollars worth of our equipment behind, not including the fact that people died during the pullout. Okay? That's a major military failure. Major foreign or military success. No, we don't have any of that. We have the opposite. Charismatic incumbent and uncharismatic challenger. Well, sorry, but I don't think that Kamala Harris is very charismatic at all, truthfully. And the challenging candidate, I would say that Trump is decently charismatic in the sense that he is able to pull people towards himself. All right, that's charisma. And as we have learned over the course of the last week, a lot of the charisma that was created or that was attributed to the Harris campaign was manufactured charisma. It is where she was paying people, celebrities primarily, to either endorse or support or to participate in her rallies and campaign events. So if you haven't heard, it's like she gave over $1 million or about $1 million to Oprah Winfrey's foundation. She gave over $500,000 to Al Sharpton, to his nonprofit. She paid over $100,000 to have a set for a podcast recreated closer to her instead of going to the set itself and filming the podcast. So a lot of what she was doing was just basically just spending money on trying to create this image, this air of charisma and excitement and joy around her campaign that wasn't there. So if you were looking at these things objectively, you could make an argument that these keys did not belong to the Democrats to begin with. At least I can. He, on the other hand, would say, no, these keys belong to the Democrats. Well, that's a problem, because if that's indeed the case, then your system's junk. It can't be both. Your system can't work and that these keys belong to the Democrats and it also fails. All right, it can't be all the above, except in just crazy land. That's, of course, where Allan Lichtman is living. Because as I pointed out, these keys are primarily subjective keys. He has his thumb on the scale with every one of these. Now, it would be bad enough if Lichtman were the only moron who was basically making the argument that these keys are indeed valid. But one thing that I have noticed is that a lot of people are latching on to Lichtman's answer as to why the keys failed, and are trying to, again, rationalize and justify his model, saying, well, no, his model wasn't broken. It wasn't that he had his thumb on the scale with every one of these keys. No, the problem was misogyny. So, and this is out of the heel, and it's an opinion piece, but still, this echoes exactly what it is that I'm essentially saying here. So, goes through, tries to explain that, hey, this is what happened. He's correctly predicted 9 out of 10, as though that's a big deal. So, most of these elections are not that difficult to really predict. This election, again, 2024, this one was a little bit more difficult to predict. And the reason, again, the polling bias. They were largely oversampling Democrats and undersampling Republicans. Now, I've made the point before, I'm not completely convinced that the only reason was because of just over and under. It could very well be where people just were lying. People were just telling them. We know that there were some colossal failures. The Iowa poll showing Harris up by 3, that was a complete nut job poll. All right, it was complete bogus. You cannot overstate how wrong that poll was. So we know there were some completely wrong polls. But beyond that, there's certainly going into the closing home stretch of the election, it looked very strong for Trump, even though there were areas that looked decently promising towards Harris. So you could say that, hey, this one was a little bit harder to predict because of it. Even though I predicted 312 electoral votes, a lot of people predicted 312 electoral votes, and that's what we ended up with, 312 electoral votes. So I guess it wasn't that hard. Anyways, so his system, they're going to talk about his system. Person says, I can't deny the enormous influence, or excuse me, he says he can't just deny the enormous influence of disinformation, all that kind of stuff. I agree. 85% of the information, though, was negative towards Trump. Meanwhile, 75% was positive towards Kamala Harris. Which side do you think has the most disinformation there, folks? I'm just going to be real. If it's that heavily skewed one direction or the other, you can bet your bottom dollar it's going to be disinformation against the individual who is already showing 85% negative news coverage. Just a reality, folks. Meanwhile, you could say the opposite, though, 75% positive for Kamala Harris. There probably was some new stuff in there that wasn't actually true. I believe Lichtman's missing key here is gender bias. That's right, gender bias. Gender bias is the reason why Lichtman got it wrong. His past elections, they were all won by men. Well, they were the only ones running except for one. I mean, really, there was only one election in the in my lifetime, actually ever, prior to this one, where there was a female candidate, and that was in 2016. And he predicted that Donald Trump would win that year. Yeah, exactly. He got that one right. Why? Because Clinton was a horrible candidate. That's why. Nobody liked her. They didn't. Even then, she still almost won. That's how crazy this is. And yet, the reason why that Harris lost this time, by even worse margins than Hillary Clinton. Do you understand that? Hillary Clinton, who a lot of people did not like. Why? because she was horrible to listen to, folks. She's going around calling people baskets of deplorables, calling them names. Well, what do we have with the Harris campaign? Now, it wouldn't have been her directly this time, but her surrogates. You've got Joe Biden calling, Donald Trump supporters trash. You've got Mark Cuban over here calling, women around Trump idiots, basically. Saying he doesn't surround himself with smart, articulate women. Well, what does that mean? It means he surrounds himself with women who aren't smart or articulate. Okay, that's basically calling them idiots. That's what he did. Now, it wasn't Harris doing that, and Harris did try to distance herself to some degree from some of these comments, but it was too little too late, honestly. In this situation, though, people really did not largely, they didn't really like Harris, as was shown in the results. So this is not an issue of misogyny or gender bias. It's not. It had nothing to do with it. Because if that were indeed the case, then why didn't she perform at least as well as Hillary Clinton did in 2016? She didn't. So where does the blame for this belong? Does it belong with the voters, or does it belong with a process that was so deeply flawed due to the fact that the individual who was making these predictions has his thumb on the scale for every single one of these keys? At the end of the day, you decide, folks. Leave your comments below. If you haven't already done so, please like, share, and subscribe. And we will catch you next time on The Mad Hatter Show.